Yeah. Are there any guides for playing duo or squad? I mean, I go over briefly like how to play duo / squads in one of my beginner tips videos. It's not like people, I get that question actually quite a lot, so I should probably just make one at some point, even though I truly believe that video does not need to be made. It's not that complex of an answer. And how about this? Before we get into the game, I'm gonna cancel our queue. I want to talk about like squads. And, you know, in fact, we can talk about it right now. So right now we're playing squads, right? Here's the deal about playing duos or squads. The only thing you need to know is routing along your team. The most important thing you can do is group with your team as early as possible. And generally speaking, that's going to be in about the 2nd or 3rd zone. So for example, if you're playing, okay, let's talk about the build we were just running. I was playing Lennox, my 2 teammates were playing Sylvia, like Boa Sylvia and Plasma Sword Yuki. What that meant was that we met up in Hotel 3rd Zone, right? So check it out. In this build, I started Avenue, went Beach, met up in Hotel. My teammates, they went Archery School and also met up in Hotel. So generally speaking, you want to be meeting with your team in around your 2nd or 3rd zone, because what that does is it makes sure that you are roughly together at the same point around the time most teams are finishing their weapon. If you are not with your team by the time most people are finishing their weapons, that's bad, because that's like the main power spike of the game. Most people go from like passive, they'll walk past you and not attack you, to like full-on aggro the second their weapon is done. So generally speaking, you want your team to be grouped up around the time that everyone's finishing their weapon, which should be around the 2nd or 3rd zone. The earlier you meet up, the better, but it's not required that you necessarily meet up super early. One thing I always tell people when it comes to duos and squads is that I would much rather have an alive teammate with a weaker build than a dead teammate who greeted for really strong items or a really like complex build that finishes everything, you know, in a specific number of zones because they're not grouping up and they get picked off, right? So that's it. Group early, get your team together, route around each other. It's more about syncing your routes and syncing your paths than it is about syncing like character composition, things like that. There's no such thing as like, oh, are you playing you know, do you have like the ADC and the support and the tank? Like, take all that MOBA knowledge you have, throw it out the window. In this game, it's all about routing with your team, making sure that you're stacked up at the right times, and not getting picked off early. Because as a team, you need to be sticking together. Another thing that I want to just highlight as far as like character strengths, characters that have AoE abilities are generally really strong in team modes also, and their AoE abilities tend to shine quite a lot more in those team modes because they can hit multiple targets. Like Piemaster just mentioned Lennox. Lennox is a perfect example of a character who is absolutely nuts in teams, and there's a good reason why they've been nerfed a bunch in teams over time. It's because every skill they have, I'm trying to think, every skill except for like the weapon skill, all AoE. They can affect the entire enemy team constantly. So that's really good. Shukai Ultimate is one of those ultimates that gets insane in teams because it can AoE whole teams. Things like that. You want to make sure that you're picking characters that also have the ability to really show their strengths when there are multiple targets to deal with. That's why characters like Jackie, characters like Fiora to an extent, have sort of seen less prominence in team modes because they can only really focus down one target at a time, whereas characters like Yuki, who are very similar to Jackie and Fiora in solos, end up being a lot better than them in squads because they have access to this massive AoE ultimate that chunks an entire enemy team. So things like that. Notice which characters are suddenly much better now that there is a lot more like AoE factors mattering. So to summarize, the most important thing about squads is routing around your team and meeting up early. The second most important thing is making sure that you're playing characters that actually do something in a team fight setting. Don't ignore the fact that it is going to be a multiple person fight. You do want to actually care about AoEs and stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much how you play squads and duos. Does that help?